October 3rd, 2019. 8:11 a.m. A hammer struck concrete in a quiet suburb on the outskirts of Port Elizabeth, South Africa. What should have been a normal home renovation stopped a construction crew mid-swing. The first impact was ordinary. The second was wrong. Not wrong in volume. Wrong in silence. A heavy, unnatural stillness followed, one that made the hairs rise on a foreman's arms and sent a murmur through the workers who had spent a lifetime listening to the language of walls. When concrete feels hollow, it means something behind it shouldn't be there. No one on the crew knew that the sound they heard that morning was the first crack in a truth buried for 22 years. For over 2 decades, neighbors had lived their lives, raised their children, and tended their gardens, completely unaware that a nightmare waited behind the walls of the house next door. But that discovery, that comes much later. For now, we start in the mid-90s. Welcome to CrimeAtlas True Stories. If you're listening for the first time, hit the subscribe button to follow more gripping real-life mysteries. Drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. And don't forget to like the video. It helps us shine a light on stories the world often tries to forget. Let's go back to where the silence began. July 18th, 1996. The night shift was dragging at Groote Hospital in Cape Town, the kind of night where fluorescent lights hummed louder than conversations. Nurses moved like ghosts down the sterile corridors, and doctors clutched coffee cups like lifelines. Among them was Nalwazi Dlamini, a 36-year-old trauma nurse known for her calm hands and tireless dedication. She was the type to stay 2 hours past her shift, the type who covered for younger staff when they needed a break, the type who remembered each patient's family by name. But at 2:17 a.m., Nalwazi collapsed in the middle of the ward. One moment she was updating a chart. The next, she gripped the edge of the nurse's station, gasped, and crumpled. Colleagues rushed in. CPR, defibrillation, adrenaline. Every tool, every procedure she herself had performed countless times. But Nalwazi's heart had already decided. She was gone before the sun rose. Her death stunned everyone. But there was someone who shattered completely. Her 16-year-old daughter, Ayanda. Neighbors would later recall seeing Ayanda standing barefoot outside her home days after the funeral, staring at every passing car as if her mother might return in one of them. She never did. Nalwazi had been the warmth of that home, the laughter, the softness, the one who kept everything stitched together. And all Ayanda had left now was her father. Her father, Sibusiso Dlamini, was 41, a respected former paramedic, a man with quiet habits, pressed shirts, and a rigid sense of routine. He was the type who woke up before dawn even on weekends, the type who ironed on Sundays, the type who corrected others gently but firmly. To the outside world, he was a grieving widower, a man broken by the unexpected loss of his wife, a father doing his best to hold life together for his only child. But grief is a mask that can hide things the world doesn't want to look at too closely. Within weeks of Nalwazi's funeral, Sibusiso resigned from the emergency medical service. He told co-workers he couldn't bear walking through the same hallways where his wife had taken her last breath. "I need to be home for Ayanda. She needs me now more than ever," he told them. People nodded. They sympathized. They understood. No one questioned him. Why would they? He was her father, and they believed him. But resignation is easy when no one suspects the reason behind it. Relatives tried to stay involved after Nalwazi's funeral. They called, they checked in, they offered to take Ayanda for school holidays or weekends. They asked how she was coping. But Sibusiso always had an answer. "She's staying with my sister in Durban for a while. She needed structure, so I enrolled her in a private boarding school. She's adjusting, she's still grieving. She's focusing on her studies. She's safe." His voice never cracked. His eyes never shifted. The lies flowed smoothly, tailored to whoever asked. And because his story always sounded confident, no one thought to question the inconsistencies. There was no missing persons report, no alarm, no urgency. Ayanda wasn't considered missing at all. She was simply elsewhere. In an age before smartphones tracked every teenager, before social media fed updates into the world, before constant connection made silence suspicious, It was far too easy for a teenager to disappear without noise. Neighbors continued with life. They waved at Cebu Ciso as he watered his lawn in the Cape Town summer heat. They greeted him at church, offering condolences months after the funeral. "He's doing the best he can," one neighbor said. Another neighbor, years later, admitted she once heard a soft cry near a basement window, but dismissed it. "I didn't want to seem nosy," she confessed. That silence protected him. Every handshake, every neighborly nod, every assumption that he was just a grieving father carved a perfect hiding place. Ayanda wasn't away at school. She wasn't with an aunt. She wasn't adjusting to grief somewhere else. Ayanda Dlamini had never left that house at all. Before we continue, welcome again to Crime Atlas. If you haven't already, tap subscribe, drop a comment telling me your city or country, and like this video to support more stories like this. Now think about this. If your neighbor told you their child moved away, would you question it? Or would you accept it at face value? Spring 1997. Ayanda was 17 now, grieving, fragile, and still trying to understand a world without her mother. She clung to Cebu Ciso not out of trust, but out of loneliness. He called her from the top of the stairs one evening. "Ayanda," he said, voice calm, "come help me with some boxes in the basement. It won't take long." Nothing in his tone suggested danger. Nothing in his posture hinted at what was about to happen. She descended the stairs slowly, barefoot, sleepy, with her hand grazing the cool rail. The basement smelled of damp cement, dust, and something older. She reached the bottom step, turned toward him, and heard it. Metal sliding, a lock fastening, a final, sharp click. "Baba," she asked, confused. "Why did you lock it?" Cebu Ciso didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply stood above her and said, clearly, calmly, "Because this is where you'll stay now." Ayanda let out a small laugh at first. She thought it was a cruel joke, a punishment gone too far. "Stop it. That's not funny. Open the door." Silence. Minutes turned to hours. Then the fear began. Raw, dense, suffocating. She called his name. She begged. She screamed. But the basement swallowed her voice. The single bulb above her flickered, casting shadows that stretched unnaturally across the concrete walls. There were no windows to track time. No fresh air. No sense of day or night. Only the rhythm of Cebu Ciso's footsteps above. He controlled everything. Her meals came in bowls pushed through a small hatch he built. Her water arrived in plastic bottles. He spoke to her only when he wanted to. He shifted between soft assurances and cold commands. Sometimes he knelt at the locked door and spoke in that same gentle tone he used at church. "You don't belong out there. People don't care about you. But I do." The words sounded like protection, but every syllable was a chain. For a girl who had already lost her mother, who had no one else left, the manipulation was a slow, poisonous drip. At first, Ayanda believed him. She convinced herself this was temporary, that he was protecting her from something. She whispered memories of her mother into the cold air, as if Nalwazi might somehow hear her. But days turned into weeks, weeks into months, hope thinned like smoke. Ayanda began marking days by scratching lines into the concrete floor, counting meals, counting footsteps, counting hours. But the basement was never quiet. At night, she cried, softly, because she learned quickly that loud cries made him angry. A neighbor once heard her through the ground, but dismissed it as a TV left on late. Another heard what she thought were whispers and told herself it was the wind. People hear things they don't understand, then dismiss them because accepting them feels heavier than ignoring them. Ayanda's world became that basement. A world without sunlight. A world without choices. A world where the only person who still called himself father was the man who locked the door. And inside that world, he began taking advantage of her in ways that stripped her identity piece by piece. It happened more than once, more than twice, too many times to count. But Ayanda learned how to survive. Silence sometimes protects, sometimes destroys, and sometimes it keeps a person alive. Stories like this are not easy to tell, but they must be told. Thank you for staying with me through this heavy and difficult chapter. If you appreciate this kind of in-depth storytelling, please like the video. It helps these stories reach more people. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. Because what happens next changes everything. Now let me ask you, if you heard faint cries from your neighbor's home, what would you do? Would you ask questions? Or would you brush it off? August 11th, 1997. It's 2:43 a.m. The basement was breathing. Not literally, but in the way old underground rooms do when the night sinks deep and warm air rises from the floorboards above. The flickering bulb cast faint shadows across the walls, long enough that Ianda sometimes mistook them for movement. She woke to a sharp pain twisting through her abdomen, a pain she could no longer pretend was ordinary. Sweat soaked the back of her thin shirt, and her hands trembled as she pressed them to her stomach. She had known something was different for months. She just didn't have the words for it. The room pulsed with her heartbeat. Her breaths came short, and each jolt of pain confirmed what she feared but didn't dare say aloud. When her first cry slipped out, soft and shaky, footsteps responded above. The door creaked. Keys rattled. Then silence. Then his voice. Ianda. Soft. Controlled. Familiar. Sibu Siso crouched at the top of the steps, his face hidden behind the shadow of the dim bulb. He brought a folded towel and a plastic bowl of water, setting them down on the bottom stair. His voice was calm, unnervingly calm. Breathe slowly. You know what this is. You'll be fine. I'll guide you. Ianda's eyes widened. No, Baba, please. I don't understand. You do. His tone sharpened just enough to make her flinch. You're strong. You'll do what's expected. Focus. Expected. The word lodged deep, hooking itself around her ribs. She curled forward as another contraction ripped through her. Every part of her young body protested. Fear, confusion, betrayal followed by the deepest, sharpest pain she had ever felt. Sibu Siso coached her like a paramedic guiding a stranger through labor. Except she wasn't a stranger. She was his daughter, and she was 16. Hours dragged on, each one indistinguishable from the next. The basement smelled of iron, sweat, and damp fabric. Ianda bit down on her knuckles to keep from screaming too loud. Keep pushing, he murmured. You were made to endure. Made. Endure. Words that felt like shackles. When the cry finally came, thin, sudden, so alive it cut through the stale air, Ianda's body sagged with exhaustion. She held the tiny newborn against her chest, as if her arms could shield the child from every darkness she had lived through. I'll keep you safe, she whispered, voice trembling. I promise. But her promise barely lived. Minutes later, Sibu Siso stepped back down the stairs. He reached for the child with gentle hands, hands that had once comforted injured patients. No, please, just one night, please, she begged. She clutched the baby tighter, but her strength was gone. Her body was a battlefield of pain, and she was losing. Sibu Siso peeled the child from her arms with the precision of a professional. Don't think about what you can't have, he said, voice soft as velvet. Your duty is already done. Rest. The door clicked shut behind him. The silence that followed was the loudest sound Ianda had ever heard. That night was the first, but not the last. Days bled into months. Months into years. Down in the dark, Ianda marked time the only way she could. With scratches in the concrete. With whispered prayers. With the rhythm of her own breathing. She learned the sound of Sibu Siso's footsteps like someone learning the language of a captor. Hard-soled shoes in the morning. Soft socks at night. Church shoes on Sundays. Heels dragging slightly on rainy days. Sometimes he spoke through the door. Sometimes he didn't speak at all. But his presence was always there. A shadow that reached even into the corners the bulb couldn't touch. Above ground, life looked painfully normal. Cape Town suburbs kept their rhythm. Children rode bicycles on the pavement. Street vendors shouted prices of fruit. Church bells rang on Sunday mornings. Neighbors tended their gardens. And Sibu Siso played the role perfectly. He changed porch lights for elderly neighbors. He donated quietly at church, slipping envelopes into offering boxes with the perfect blend of humility and grief. He chatted about weather, petrol prices, and rugby scores. People saw a model citizen, a polite widower, a quiet man, a father who kept his pain private. Respectability is a powerful disguise, especially in communities where privacy is considered virtue and suspicion is considered rude. No one pressed him. Not deeply. Not consistently. It was easier to accept the story he told. Ayanda is away at school. She's doing well. She's safe. Than to risk being wrong. Inside the basement, Ayanda learned new ways to survive. She created rituals. Count 10 breaths when fear builds. Count 100 when the walls feel too close. Hum her mother's favorite lullaby when her hands shake. Whisper, "Mama, don't forget me," into her blanket every night. She traced letters into the dust, names she wished she could say aloud. She spoke to her absent child as if the baby could hear her through the ceiling. "You had my eyes," she whispered once. "You were perfect." But she never knew where her child went, and Cebu Siso never told her. He only came back with more commands, each one laced with a twisted tenderness. "You're safe here. You were chosen for this. This is our family legacy. You serve a purpose." Purpose. As if she were not a girl with dreams, a girl who once laughed in the sun, a girl who lost her mother too early. In captivity, purpose becomes a weapon. The neighborhood kept missing the signs. One night, around 2 a.m., Ayanda's muffled sob carried through the vents and drifted across to the next house. Mrs. Evelyn Dutoit paused at her kitchen sink, certain she heard something that didn't belong to any TV show or stray cat. A soft cry, a whimper, something human. She stepped closer to the window. Then she shook her head. "These old houses," she murmured. "They echo." She turned off the tap, and the silence swallowed the sound. Another neighbor, Mr. Obert Themba, heard shuffling near the foundation during a winter storm. He frowned but chalked it up to rats or plumbing. These were moments. Small chances. Missed opportunities. Moments that could have changed everything. But no one acted, and the door stayed locked. Ayanda lost count of the years. Seasons changed. Warm summers, windy springs, cold rains beating against the house. Yet the basement stayed the same. The flickering bulb, the concrete walls, the smell of dampness. Cebu Siso controlled her world down to the smallest detail. He rationed her food, measured her weight, timed her bathroom breaks, checked her physical condition like she was a patient in a long-term ward. At first, Ayanda resisted in small ways. Silent treatment, refusing to eat for a day, covering the hatch with her blanket. But none of it changed anything. Later came the bargaining. If she did everything he wanted, if she stayed silent, if she obeyed, maybe he would leave one child with her. Just one. Just long enough for her to memorize a face. But he never did, and she learned not to hope. Then came the second pregnancy, and the third, and the fourth. She stopped counting at some point, because counting felt like acknowledging something that took pieces of her she couldn't afford to lose. Each labor followed the same pattern. His towels, his instructions, her pain, a baby's cry, then the door closing, then the silence. The silence was always the worst part. Above ground, small cracks in the story began forming, but no one followed them. Cebu Siso's explanations always fit neatly into the spaces people wanted filled. Ayanda is boarding with relatives. Ayanda is studying medicine. Ayanda prefers privacy. Ayanda doesn't visit much. The lies were simple, comfortable, and people accepted them. A retired nurse, Ms. Clara Daniels, bumped into Cebu Siso outside a pharmacy in 2003. She remembered Ayanda vividly, a bright girl who used to bring her mother flowers after long shifts. "How is her daughter?" she asked, smiling warmly. Cebu Siso didn't blink. "She's away. She's fine." He adjusted the shopping in his basket and asked about Clara's health, her grandchildren, her church. He redirected the conversation effortlessly. Later, in her car, Clara frowned. He hadn't mentioned a school, a city, a program, anything. Just away. Just fine. She scribbled a note to call someone, maybe another relative, but when she got home, life pulled her in other directions. The note ended up under a stack of old magazines and was never found again. Another missed hinge. Another door left untouched. Deep underground, Ayanda's internal world shifted. She became quieter. Her mind began creating safe places, imaginaries that lived only inside her. A beach her mother once described. A sunlit kitchen from childhood. A childhood friend whose face she barely remembered. She started whispering stories to herself in the dark, stories that reminded her she was still human, that she still belonged somewhere. And she kept telling herself, I'm still Ayanda. I'm still my mother's child. I'm still here. Even when she didn't feel alive. Even when she wasn't sure she existed outside that room. Some nights, she placed her hand against the wall and whispered, Please, God, let someone hear. But no one did. Not yet. The house itself eventually started revealing the truth, just not loudly enough. Paint cracked in places that shouldn't crack. A faint line formed near the basement window. A draft carried through vents where no draft should exist. And once, a storm made the foundation shake in a way that startled even Sibusiso. He increased soundproofing. He added more insulation. He reinforced the door. Ayanda heard the hammering. She felt the vibrations. Another prison built inside the prison. Yet she still whispered, I'm here, whenever the walls trembled. As if the world might finally tremble back. Ladies and gentlemen watching this story, we're only scratching the surface of Ayanda's years in captivity. The truth is darker, deeper, more unsettling than the community could have imagined. But before we go any further, hit that like button if you're still with me. Drop a comment telling me if you've ever had a neighbor whose behavior didn't quite add up. And make sure you subscribe, because this story is about to unravel piece by piece. Now think about this for a moment. How many warning signs would you need before you acted? 1, 2, 20, asterisk, asterisk. Or would you, like so many in this community, convince yourself that everything was normal? May 14th, 2004, 11:52 p.m. Winter wind swept across the Cape Town neighborhood, rattling windows and shaking dried leaves loose from the jacaranda trees lining the street. Inside the Dlamini house, life appeared calm. Outside, it appeared peaceful. Inside the basement, Ayanda was fighting for her life again. The second discovery of life. Her contractions had begun earlier that afternoon, creeping in like a tightness that refused to leave. She tried to brace herself, folding her thin blanket beneath her knees, gripping the edge of the rusted metal cot Sibusiso had placed in the basement years earlier. The bulb flickered, once, twice, then steadied into a weak glow. She whispered to herself, slow breaths, count 2, 3. It didn't help. The pain returned in waves, sharp, hot, suffocating. She tried to keep quiet, but a whimper escaped her, echoing against the concrete walls. Footsteps answered. He always came when she cried. The lock clicked. Keys jingled. His silhouette appeared at the top of the stairs like a shadow that had learned how to walk. Ayanda, Sibusiso said softly. You know what to do. You've done this before. She swallowed hard, tears streaking down her cheeks. Please, please don't take this one, she whispered, breath trembling. Please, Baba, let me keep one. He didn't answer. Instead, he placed a fresh towel on the bottom stair, set down a bowl of warm water, and removed his gloves one finger at a time like a seasoned medic preparing for a procedure. You will do well, he said. You always do. Hours passed. Her screams faded into groans. Her muscles trembled from exhaustion. Her vision blurred from pain. She had delivered a child once before. But the second time, it broke something deeper. When the baby's cry cut through the stale air, tiny, sharp, alive, Ayanda sobbed with a kind of joy so fragile it seemed borrowed. She held the baby close. Warm, soft, real, a piece of her. For the first time since Nalwazi died, Ayanda felt something like hope, something like motherhood, something like purpose that wasn't twisted into chains. But minutes later, footsteps returned. Sibusiso descended 2 steps. Pass the child, he ordered. No. Ayanda clutched the infant tightly. Just let me hold them longer, please. Please, I'll do anything. You already have. His voice was calm, cold, final. Give them to me. She shook her head. I'm begging you. He stepped closer. Ayanda, don't make this difficult. Her hands trembled. Her arms weakened. Her body had nothing left to fight with. With one swift motion, he pried the infant from her grasp. Ayanda collapsed back onto the cot, sobbing silently as the door closed above her for the second time in her life after giving birth. And once again, the silence that followed swallowed her whole. While Ayanda endured the unseen, the world kept moving without her. By 2004, the neighborhood had changed. New families, new routines, new gossip. But Sibusiso? He remained exactly the same. Polite, quiet, helpful, and always alone. He still attended St. Paul's Church every Sunday, sitting in the same pew, nodding politely at the same people. He still paid bills early, still kept his lawn trimmed perfectly, still waved at neighbors walking their dogs. It was the kind of routine that made people trust him without thinking. But little cracks had begun forming, small moments that could have led someone to question him, if they'd allowed themselves to. One night, nearly a month after the second baby was taken, a loud thud shook the Dlamini house during a storm. Rain pounded the roof. Thunder rumbled. But the sound was heavier, like furniture crashing against a wall. Mrs. Kamatso Mabeso, the neighbor across the street, paused as she was washing dishes. Her eyes drifted toward the Dlamini home. She'd always found the place too quiet, too controlled, too still. The lights flickered. Another thud. She wiped her hands on a towel and stepped closer to the window. Should I check? She wondered aloud. Then immediately countered herself. No. Sibusiso is private, and people grieve differently. She turned off the sink, went to bed. The sound was forgotten by morning. Weeks later, 12-year-old Junaid, who lived 2 houses down, rode his bike past the Dlamini home around dusk. He slowed near the side of the house, curious about a loose board on the fence. Then he heard it. A soft tapping. 3 taps. Slow. Rhythmic. Tap. 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 He froze. The sound came from the basement window. What was that? He whispered, leaning closer. Another tap. Then silence. He biked home faster than usual and told his older sister, I think the basement at the Dlamini house is haunted. His sister laughed and told him to stop watching scary movies. Another missed sign. One afternoon, Mrs. Noor, a retired teacher, walked past the Dlamini driveway when she noticed something odd. Sibusiso was loading what looked like a large duffel bag into his car. Heavy, awkwardly shaped. He almost dropped it. When she waved at him, he jumped, startled. His smile came a moment too late. Everything all right, Sibusiso? She asked gently. Just dropping donations at a shelter, he replied quickly. She nodded, accepting the explanation. Why wouldn't she? He'd always been helpful, polite, quiet. Someone like him couldn't possibly be hiding something horrible, right? Inside the basement, Ayanda begins to break. Not physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. Her body healed from her second pregnancy, but her mind didn't. She spent hours curled on the cold floor, hours whispering to a child she could no longer hold, hours staring at the ceiling wondering if the world above still existed or if she had imagined it in another life. She barely spoke to Sibusiso anymore, even when he addressed her. She avoided his gaze when he opened the hatch to give her food, but he didn't like her silence. One evening, he knelt at the locked door and spoke through the metal like he was delivering scripture. You are fulfilling a divine purpose, he said softly. You are chosen, Ayanda. Not everyone can do what you do. He paused. You will thank me one day. She whispered back, voice shaking. I will never thank you. For the first time in years, he grew visibly angry. His voice dropped, lower than she'd ever heard it. You will do as I say. You will comply. You have no one else. No one is looking for you. No one misses you. I'm the only one you have left. The words were knives, and they cut deep. Ayanda turned her back to the door and curled into herself. She told herself her mother would never have wanted this. She told herself she was more than a prison, more than a body. But the walls answered with silence. Desperation pushed her into small acts of rebellion. She found tiny scraps, labels from food packets, torn corners of cardboard, edges of plastic wrappers. Using a dull pencil Sibusiso had once accidentally left behind, she wrote messages. Not full sentences, just fragments of survival. My body is not his. I'm still here. He cannot erase me. I had a daughter. I had a son. I remember. She hid the scraps. Behind a loose brick. Under her mattress. In the lining of her blanket. Inside cracks in the wall. She knew he might find them. She knew there was risk. But writing kept her sane. Writing reminded her she existed. Writing reminded her she was Ayanda Dlamini, daughter of Nalwazi, not just a vessel for her father's madness. Years passed. Ayanda turned 20. Then 21. Then 22. 22 years old. And she had lived nearly a third of her life underground. And above her, the world continued with frightening normalcy. People married, divorced, had children, bought cars, sold homes, changed jobs, and no one, not one person, asked where Ianda was strongly enough to demand an answer. That's how silence becomes a weapon. That's how monsters thrive. But every monster eventually makes a mistake. On the night of June 19th, 2005, the street was unusually quiet. Mr. Themba was sitting on his back steps smoking. Mrs. Noor was reading scripture in her living room. Teenagers walked home from youth group at church. And Ianda was in the middle of her third labor. This one was harder, longer, more dangerous. Something was different. Something felt wrong. And this time, her cries were louder, too loud to muffle. Her pain reverberated through the vents, through the walls, into the soil beneath the house. Her final scream echoed, just as a passing couple walked near the sidewalk. They stopped. The woman frowned. "Did you hear that?" Her boyfriend shrugged. "Probably a TV." She hesitated. "It didn't sound like a TV." "Babe, don't overthink. It's late." They walked on. But the scream lingered. It drifted into the night, like a warning, like a plea, like a crack in the mask Sibusiso had worn for too long. Before we continue, if this chapter has shaken you, hit like to support the story. Leave a comment telling me, have you ever ignored a strange sound because it felt easier than investigating it? And make sure you subscribe, because this story is about to turn. The community hears something they can no longer ignore, and the wall begins to crack. June 19th, 2005, 1:28 a.m. A still, cold night lay across the Port Elizabeth suburb like a blanket no one asked for. Streetlights flickered, dogs barked in distant yards, and the Dlamini home, as usual, sat in perfect, eerie silence. At least, that's how it appeared from the outside. Inside the basement, Ianda was fighting through her third delivery, her hands clawing at the edges of the thin mattress, her breath coming in sharp bursts of pain. Sweat slid down her temples. Her vision pulsed with each contraction. She had done this before, but this time felt different. This time her body was giving out faster than she could hold on. Pain sliced through her midsection, so sharply that a cry tore from her throat before she could stop it. The sound rose through the vents, up the wall, through the cracks that had begun forming, up into the night air. And someone heard it. Mr. Isaac Themba, the older man who lived behind the Dlamini residence, was sitting on his back steps, smoking quietly. He couldn't sleep. He rarely did anymore. He often listened to the sounds of the night to calm his nerves. But tonight, he froze. A scream, soft but unmistakably human, slipped into the air. He rose slowly, straining to hear more. Another faint cry, then silence. He squinted toward the Dlamini home. "Strange," he muttered. "Sibusiso lives alone." He thought about going closer, knocking on the wall even, but a lifetime of politeness held him back. Probably a stray animal, he reasoned, or a late-night movie. He took another drag of his cigarette. The moment passed. Another sign dismissed. A few houses down, 15-year-old Marcus Setilo walked his dog, Nala, before heading to bed. He wasn't supposed to be out that late, but his insomnia often pushed him to wander the neighborhood under the safety of streetlights. As he passed the Dlamini house, Nala tugged on the leash. Hard. She growled low, anxious. Marcus frowned. "What's wrong, girl?" Then he saw it. A shadow behind the basement window. The movement was slow, low, and human. Not the shadow of a cat or a raccoon. Not a trick of the wind. A person. He froze. "Hello," he whispered. The shadow stilled. No answer. Marcus's chest tightened. Every horror story he'd watched late at night flooded his mind at once. He backed away slowly, tugging Nala with him, and sprinted home. When he told his mother what he saw, she brushed his fear aside. A shadow in the Dlamini house. "Ah, Marcus, that man is a church deacon. Behave." He tried again. "Ma, what if someone's in trouble?" She raised a hand. "Enough. It's late. Sleep." And like that, the second warning died in the air. Across the street, Mrs. Evelyn Dutoit woke to a loud thump against her wall. She sat up, startled. The electricity flickered from a storm outside. Then she heard it again. Thump, followed by a short, sharp cry. She tiptoed to her kitchen window and peered across at the Dlamini home. The basement light flickered weakly. A chill ran through her. Her fingers gripped the curtain. "I should check on him," she whispered. She reached for her phone, then hesitated. What'd she say? Hi, I heard a noise. I thought someone was hurt. Hi, Cebu Ciso. I think your basement has a person inside it. It sounded absurd in her mind. She lowered her phone. It's nothing, she whispered. Just the wind, or old pipes. She went back to bed, turning up the TV volume to drown out her own unease. Third sign ignored. Inside the basement, Ayanda's world breaks open. The contractions came faster, harder, more painful. Ayanda bit down on her trembling fingers to keep from screaming again, but another cry escaped her lips when the baby shifted. Her legs shook. Her ears rang. Her heart pounded against her ribs. She had delivered 2 children before, but this labor was different. More dangerous, more violent, more terrifying. Her mind blurred. Her body trembled. When the door finally opened, she didn't even have the strength to flinch. Cebu Ciso stepped inside, his face expressionless, his eyes cold with effortless control. He moved like a man performing a practiced ritual. Ayanda, he said, kneeling, you need to breathe. You know how this works. Her voice cracked. Please, no more. I can't. I can't. You can. He placed a damp cloth on her forehead, his touch gentle despite the cruelty embedded in his words. You were born strong. Now push. Hours passed. And then, another cry. Sharp. Soft. New. Ayanda pressed the newborn to her chest. She cried, not just from pain, but from the overwhelming flood of love and despair crashing through her. You're my baby, she whispered. My baby. Please let me keep you, please. But the moment didn't last. Cebu Ciso reached for the child. No, no, no. Please. Just this one, Baba, please, she pleaded, her voice breaking. No. His voice held the weight of a verdict. You know the rules. He took the baby and walked up the stairs. Ayanda's sobs echoed through the concrete, tapering into silence as he locked the door behind him. What haunted the community most, long after the truth surfaced, were the small details they remembered later. Details that made them whisper to themselves. I should have asked more questions. I should have knocked. I should have trusted my instincts. These were the things they would replay again and again. But in 2005, no one saw the full picture. No one understood the pattern. No one connected the cries, the shadows, the thuds, or the flickering basement light. Every monster learns how to survive in daylight. And Cebu Ciso mastered the performance. He smiled at children, carried groceries for elderly neighbors, donated quietly at charity drives, spoke politely to store clerks, offered to help repair broken fences. He attended church without fail, sitting in the same pew every Sunday, hands folded neatly, nodding at the pastor's words. To the public, he was a grieving widower, a quiet man, a helpful neighbor, not someone capable of locking his daughter underground, not someone who used her body for selfish gain, not someone who built a world on lies and forged documents. No one questioned him, because everyone feared being wrong more than they feared ignoring a truth that felt impossible. After her third child was taken, Ayanda's mind shifted into new territory, one that frightened even her. She began hearing sounds that weren't there. Her heartbeat echoed like footsteps. Her breaths sounded like whispers. Her tears fell without her realizing she was crying. Her loneliness took on a life of its own. She whispered lullabies to the air, imagining her children listening from somewhere beyond the ceiling. You had my mother's smile, she whispered. You had my hands. You had my heart. She traced letters on the wall. L-I-V-E. It wasn't a declaration. It was a reminder, a plea, a command, a mantra. But the basement was starvation for the soul, and she was starving. Over the years, moisture had weakened parts of the basement foundation. Each winter rainstorm, each summer humidity wave, each vibration of Cebu Ciso walking above added pressure. The wall began to crack. Slowly, quietly, Ayanda noticed a tiny line above the fuse box. At first, it was the size of a fingernail, then the size of a matchstick, then the size of a long, jagged thread. She placed her palm over it every night. Please, she whispered, please be the way out. She didn't know the crack would eventually play a role in her rescue. Not yet. She only knew it meant something was changing, even if she didn't know how or when. In late 2006, a neighbor finally made a phone call. The noise that night was too loud to ignore, A violent bang, a dragging sound, a muffled cry. Within minutes, 2 officers from the local police unit pulled up quietly, lights off to avoid disturbing the neighborhood. They knocked on the Dlamini door, and Cebu Ciso answered wearing press pajamas, his face the perfect blend of concern and confusion. "Officers, is something wrong?" They explained they received a noise complaint. He frowned politely. "Oh, that must have been the boiler," he said. "This house is old, and winter always makes the pipes act up." He led them to the kitchen and gently tapped a metal pipe with a spoon. It echoed loudly, shockingly loudly, through the floor. The officers exchanged a look. The explanation fit. The demonstration made sense. Case closed. Ayanda, 30 feet below their boots, held her breath until they left. Her heart raced. Her body trembled. For the first time in years, she had been within earshot of rescue. And still, the door stayed locked. If you're still here, if you're still following Ayanda's journey, hit the like button to push this story to more people. Drop a comment. Do you think the neighbors should have insisted the police check the basement? Or would you have hesitated too? And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any story. September 2nd, 2007, 6:14 p.m. A cold wind rolled through Port Elizabeth as the sun dipped, painting the sky a burnt orange. Children rushed indoors. Street vendors wrapped up their stalls. Porch lights flickered on one by one across the neighborhood. And in the Dlamini home, Cebu Ciso's routine, rigid as always, continued without interruption. But something was different that evening. An imbalance. A shift. A vibration in the air that seemed to signal that the quiet world he had built was starting to fray at the edges. He felt it. Ayanda felt it. And soon, the neighborhood would too. Ayanda traced her fingers along the wall, feeling the crack she'd watched for months. It had grown, barely visible still, but larger than before. She pressed her ear against the cold concrete and listened. A faint sound. Footsteps. Voices. Life. Her heart thudded. Was the wall weakening? Was the ground shifting? Were the sounds just her imagination? She didn't know. But the possibility, the smallest whisper of maybe, sparked something inside her she hadn't felt in years. Hope. She wasn't sure. Not yet. She touched the crack again, pressing her thumb into it, until the jagged edge bit into her skin. "If you're my way out," she whispered, "please grow." In early September, a new resident moved into the yellow house next door. A middle-aged nurse named Ms. Thandika Moyo. She wasn't like the others. Observant. Disciplined. Experienced in spotting signs of stress, trauma, or illness. And she was suspicious of silence. On her first evening, as she unpacked boxes in her driveway, she watched Cebu Ciso walk from his car at his front door with a precision she instantly clocked. Rigid posture. Perfectly controlled breathing. No wasted movements. "Doctor or ex-military," she murmured. "Or a man with something to hide." She couldn't tell which. But she felt something off immediately, a kind of stillness around his home that wasn't natural. And then, as she carried a box into her kitchen, she heard it. A faint tapping. Tap, tap, tap. She paused. Her nurse instinct sharpened. That wasn't pipes. That wasn't furniture. That was patterned. Intentional. Human. She set the box down slowly and moved closer to the wall, listening. Silence resumed. Then a muffled sound. A whimper. "God," she whispered. What was that? Most neighbors had dismissed similar sounds over the years. But Thandika wasn't most neighbors. The next morning, Cebu Ciso left early, earlier than usual, to buy supplies. He backed out of his driveway with his usual precision. But he forgot one thing. He didn't fully lock the basement door. Ayanda noticed immediately. She heard the latch shift, not click. She felt the air change, the smallest draft brushing across her cheek. Her heart pounded. Her breath caught in her chest. This was the first mechanical mistake he had ever made. She crawled to the door, hands trembling. She pushed the edge with her palm. It didn't move. She pushed again. Still nothing. Then she pressed her shoulder into it. It didn't open, but it rattled. Rattled. Which meant the lock hadn't fully engaged. Her eyes widened. Her pulse thundered. She pressed her ear to the door. Nothing. But a loose lock meant a possibility. For the first time in nearly a decade, Ayanda felt her chest fill with something she had forgotten how to feel. Determination. Over the following days, small observations began piling up in the community, but quietly, subtly, almost imperceptibly. People whispered, "I heard something strange the other night. Why is he always alone? Why does his house feel wrong? Have you ever seen anyone visit?" Rumors spread, but they never lasted long. Cebu Siso's reputation as a polite, helpful man always overshadowed them. But Thandika saw past the facade. And 2 weeks after hearing the tapping, she decided to act. Not fully. Not yet. She started with questions. She approached the elderly Mrs. Dutoit during her morning walk. "Tell me about the man next door," Thandika said calmly. Mrs. Dutoit smiled stiffly. "A good man. Quiet. Lost his wife years ago. And his daughter?" The older woman's forehead creased. "His daughter? Oh, Ianda." Her voice softened. "A shame, really. Went away young. Never visits. Never. Not once." Thandika's eyes sharpened. "He ever show you letters? Photos? School records?" Mrs. Dutoit hesitated. "Come to think of it, no." Thandika nodded slowly, her suspicion deepening. Something was off. Very off. Ianda sat on the floor, her back against the cold wall, listening to something strange above her. Voices. 2 women. Talking outside. Saying her name. Ianda. Her heart nearly stopped. No one had spoken her name in years, except her captor. She crawled closer to the crack, pressing her ear against it. She could hear faint murmurs, but not clearly. Still, the fact that anyone said her name above ground made her feel alive again. Made her feel visible. Made her feel found. For the first time in many years, she whispered, "Someone is asking about me." Her voice shook. Her fingers trembled. She knelt in front of the wall and rested her forehead against the concrete. "Please," she whispered. "If you hear me, anyone, please don't stop." Around the same time, miles away in another part of Eastern Cape, a woman named Mrs. Zanil Dlamini, Ianda's aunt, found an old box in her storeroom. Letters, photos, school reports, newspaper clippings about Nawaz's death. And then, a piece of paper she'd forgotten she kept. Ianda's emergency file from school, containing her ID number. Her last reported home address. The address was the Dlamini home. Her husband found her crying on the floor hours later. "What's wrong?" he asked, kneeling. "We never looked for her," she whispered, voice shaking. "We let the grief swallow us. We believed what he told us. We never checked." Her hands trembled as she clutched the file. "I think something is wrong with my sister's child." Her husband placed a hand on her shoulder. "What do you want to do?" She wiped her eyes. "I want to find her." Those words would eventually change everything. But not yet. Not soon. Her search would take months to gain traction, delayed by bureaucracy, distance, and the false report Cebu Siso had created. Still, the first spark had been lit. Someone outside the neighborhood was asking questions now. And that mattered. 2 weeks later, another shift occurred. A smell. Faint. Sour. Musty. It seeped through the side of the Dlamini home. The kind of smell neighbors didn't associate with anything familiar. Not sewage. Not trash. Not damn laundry. It was something else. A smell that made Mrs. Noor wrinkle her nose one afternoon as she watered her plants. "What is that?" she muttered. She took 2 steps toward the Dlamini home. Sniffed the air again. The odor drifted from the basement vents. She frowned deeply. Later, she would say she felt something evil in that moment. But she turned away, convincing herself she was imagining things. For years, his control was perfect. Every detail measured. Every lie structured. Every movement calculated. But in 2007, the weight of his secret began to press harder than before. He slept less, aged quickly, talked to himself under his breath. The fear of exposure affects even the calmest monsters. And Cebu Siso was no exception. People noticed the change. Stress, they assumed. Aging. Loneliness. No one guessed the truth. But the cracks in his behavior were widening, mirroring the widening crack in the basement wall. After weeks of hearing faint voices above her, neighbors walking, children playing, a woman who said her name, Ianda realized something. If she stayed silent, she would die here. If she stayed compliant, nothing would change. If she waited for rescue, she might wait forever. She had to try. One afternoon, she pressed her lips to the crack in the wall and whispered, "I'm here. Please hear me." No response. So she scraped the concrete with her nails, trying to widen it. A fragment broke off. Her breath caught. If she could make the crack bigger, if sound could travel more clearly, if someone, anyone, stood near the wall at the right time, maybe the world would finally hear her. She pressed her face against the cold surface and whispered again, louder this time. "Help me." The basement swallowed her plea, but the neighborhood didn't. Not completely. Not anymore. Before we continue, like this video if you're still with me. Comment below where you are watching from. If you heard a strange noise from your neighbor's house, would you investigate? Or would fear stop you? And subscribe also. January 4th, 2008, 9:03 p.m. The sky was a deep blue fading into black, the kind of evening where the heat from the day still clung to the pavement. The neighborhood was settling into its usual quiet. Dogs lay in front yards. Families ate late dinners. A soft breeze brushed through the jacaranda leaves, creating a gentle rustle. But inside the Dlamini home, inside that suffocating, silent prison where Ayanda had spent nearly a decade, the air was different. Thick, tense, charged with something about to break. Something that would change everything. Ayanda sat on the cold basement floor, her knees pulled tight against her chest. She'd barely slept in days. The crack in the wall had widened enough for her to slide a fingernail into it. It wasn't much. Not enough to see through. Not enough to escape. But enough that she could hear more clearly. Voices, footsteps, cars, children life. And every sound tortured her in equal measure. She placed her ear against the wall and whispered, "If anyone can hear me, please." Her voice broke. "I'm here." She didn't expect a reply. But that night, she got one. A faint sound. A tiny voice. A child playing outside. Ayanda's breath hitched. She pressed her palms against the concrete as tears filled her eyes. A child's laugh. A real one. Not imagined. Not a memory. She closed her eyes and listened as if the sound could stitch all her broken pieces back together. And then, the front door upstairs opened. Heavy footsteps. Measured. Predictable. Sibusiso was home. Ayanda's heart dropped into her stomach. Sibusiso was changing. Ayanda felt it long before the neighborhood did. She sensed it in the way he moved, in the weight of his footsteps, in the tightness of his voice. He was agitated, distracted, unsteady, the kind of man whose secrets were becoming too heavy for him. He descended the basement stairs with a tray, food, water, a folded blanket. But he didn't speak to her. Not that night. He simply stared at her. A long, unsettling stare. One that made her instinctively curl deeper into the corner, pulling her blanket over her legs. "What?" she whispered. He didn't answer. Not first. Then he finally said, "We need to be more careful." Ayanda frowned. "More careful?" she echoed. "No one must hear you," he said, voice low and sharp. "No slips. No mistakes. Not now. Not now." The words dripped with fear. But fear of what? He didn't explain. He simply turned his back, climbed the stairs, and locked the door without another word. But Ayanda knew something had shifted. Something big. At 9:17 p.m., the neighborhood power flickered. A transformer issue. A brief blackout. A few seconds of total darkness. Then lights returning. Then the hum of electricity restoring itself. A trivial moment for the community. A catastrophic moment for the basement. Because in the darkness, the basement bulb went out completely. For the first time in years, Ayanda was plunged into absolute darkness. Pitch black. Claustrophobic. Suffocating. Her breathing quickened. She reached out blindly, trying to feel the walls. Panic flooded her chest, heavy and uncontrollable. She began to sob, and then, footsteps above her. Fast. Heavy. Agitated. Sibusiso came down with a flashlight. He pointed it directly into her face, making her flinch. "What did you do?" he snapped. Her eyes widened. "In nothing." "What? Are you trying to cause attention? Trying to get someone to hear you?" His voice was rising. "Ayanda, don't be stupid." She shook her head, trembling. "I didn't do anything. Please, I swear." The flashlight beam trembled in his hand. "You think you can outsmart me?" he hissed. "Do you forget who controls this house? Who controls your life?" Ayanda cried, pressing her back against the wall. "Please, please stop." "Shut up," he roared. And he struck the wall beside her head so hard the flashlight flickered. His rage vibrated through the room. But then, he froze. His eyes widened. He leaned closer to the wall and whispered, "What is this?" He touched the crack. He pressed his thumb into it. It crumbled slightly. His face shifted. Fear? Shock? Anger? Ayanda couldn't tell. "You've been scratching this," he said through gritted teeth. "No," she whispered. It just appeared." He slammed the wall again. Harder. Dust fell onto the floor. Ayanda screamed. The scream she'd been swallowing for nearly 10 years. Raw loud. Unfiltered. And this time, someone heard it. Next door, Thandika Moyo was sitting at her kitchen table reviewing night shift notes when she heard it. A scream. Not the kind that comes from television. Not the kind that comes from a child playing. A scream of pain. Fear. Desperation. A woman's voice. She stood so fast her chair fell backward. "No, that wasn't normal," she whispered. She rushed to her window and stared across the narrow gap between their houses. A light flickered in the basement. A shadow moved. Another scream, caught in the middle and cut off, as if a hand had smothered it. Her heart pounded. She grabbed her phone. But instead of calling the police immediately, she did something no other neighbor had done in 10 years. She walked straight out of her house, crossed the driveway, and stepped onto Cebu Siso's property. "Mr. Dlamini, are you all right?" She knocked. Firmly. No answer. She knocked again, louder this time. "Mr. Dlamini, I heard something." Silence. Then, after nearly a full minute, the door cracked open. Cebu Siso stood there, face partially lit by a dim hallway bulb. His breathing was off. His eyes were too wide. His shirt was damp with sweat. "Yes." Thandika narrowed her eyes. "I heard a woman scream," she said, "from inside your home." He blinked slowly. "A woman." His tone was too calm. She didn't blink. "Yes," she said. "A woman." He straightened, forcing a smile. "Oh, that must have been the TV." He paused. "A crime show. I'll listen carefully for those things," she replied. "I've been a nurse for 32 years. That wasn't a TV scream." He stiffened. "It was the TV," he repeated sharper. "Then let me hear it," she said boldly. "Turn it on." His face twitched. "No," he replied flatly. "It's late." Thandika's hand tightened around her phone. She stepped closer to the door. "Mr. Dlamini," she said slowly, "if someone is in danger, you need to tell me." The silence that followed stretched long and uncomfortable. Finally, Cebu Siso stepped back. "I'm alone," he said. His voice cracked, barely audible. "I'm always alone." He shut the door. Not gently, but violently. The sound echoed down the street. Thandika stared at the door for a long moment before whispering, "Something is wrong in that house." She walked home shaking, and for the first time, she called the police. Ayanda sat trembling in the dark basement, her hands covering her ears, trying to steady her breathing. She had heard it. The knock. The woman's voice. The conversation upstairs muffled but unmistakable. Someone had heard her. Someone had come. Someone cared. Someone finally suspected. She brought her hands to her mouth, stifling a sob. "Please come back," she whispered. "Please, please don't give up on me." For the first time in nearly 10 years, she allowed herself to believe rescue was possible. Not certain, not imminent, but possible. And sometimes, possibility is the strongest form of hope. 20 minutes later, a police car pulled up. A soft knock, then a louder one, then the voices of 2 officers. "Mr. Dlamini, please open the door." Silence. "Sir, we received a report." Still silence. They stepped back and noted the residents. Filed a routine welfare concern report. Knocked one more time. No answer. No forced entry. No warrant. They eventually left. Another missed chance. But this time, it didn't fade into nothing. Because Thandika was not done. The next day, whispers began circulating openly. Not quiet. Not embarrassed. Not dismissive. Louder. Fearful. Concerned. "I heard the scream. So did I. Something isn't right. Someone needs to check that house properly." The illusion of Cebu Siso's perfect facade had finally cracked. The neighborhood didn't know it yet, but they had just taken their first step on the road that would eventually reveal everything he'd hidden below their feet. If you're still with me in this heartbreaking journey, hit like right now so this story gets to more people. Drop a comment. If you heard a scream from your neighbor's house, would you knock? Would you call the police? Or would fear and doubt hold you back? And remember to subscribe. January 12th, 2008. 4:48 p.m. Summer heat hung thick in the air, sticking to people's skin as they made their way through the neighborhood. Children played in sprinklers. Neighbors trimmed hedges. Street vendors pushed carts of Miley's and ice cream. But the Dlamini house was silent. Too silent. And people couldn't ignore it anymore. 1. Whispers turned into action. For nearly a week after the scream, neighbors whispered in hushed tones, peering over fences and into windows. Some swore they heard more sounds, a soft cry, a thud, a muffled cough. Others insisted they felt a presence near the house. But one thing was certain. Everyone felt uneasy. And unease breeds suspicion. It started small. A woman lingered outside her gate longer than usual. A teenager biked slower past the basement window. A group of mothers discussed their concerns at the corner shop. But the most consistent watcher was Thandika. Every morning, she sat on her front steps with her tea, pretending to enjoy the sunrise, while her eyes stayed locked on Sibu Siso's house. She watched when he left, when he returned, when his curtains shifted, when lights flickered, when silence became too heavy. Her instincts screamed louder every passing day. There is someone inside that house. Someone he is hiding. Someone who screamed. On the afternoon of January 12th, Sibu Siso was mowing his lawn, something he rarely did midweek. He kept his eyes down, his movements mechanical, his jaw clenched. Thandika approached him calmly. "Good afternoon," she said. He stiffened. "Afternoon. I wanted to follow up about last week," she said, voice measured. "That scream. TV." He snapped quickly. Too quickly. "I told you." She didn't blink. What show makes a woman scream like she's terrified? No answer. His grip on the mower tightened. Thandika tilted her head. "You seem stressed, Mr. Dlamini." "I'm fine." "You don't look fine." He froze. For a moment, his mask slipped. His eyes hardened, sharp and hostile, the kind of look predators give when cornered. Then he straightened his back and forced a smile. "Have a good day." He turned away. Thandika didn't move. Something about his expression chilled her to her bones. She whispered to herself, "He's scared, and men like him only get scared when they're losing control." Ayanda sat against the wall, staring at the widening crack, now long enough to slip part of her finger into. She whispered, "Someone heard me. Someone came." She didn't know who the woman was. She didn't know what happened after the scream. She didn't know if help was coming. But she knew one thing. She could no longer stay silent. She touched the crack again, gently this time, feeling the faint vibration of footsteps somewhere above. "Whoever you are," she whispered, "please come back." Her voice trembled. "I'm here. I'm alive, please." She didn't know that above her, the person she was praying for was coming back. And she would keep coming back. And she would eventually refuse to leave without answers. Around 7:13 p.m., a police car rolled into the street again. Thandika had called them. Again. This time she insisted. "Officers," she said, "there is something wrong in that house. I heard a woman scream. I heard a struggle. That man is hiding something." The officers exchanged a glance. Standard protocol was to treat it as a noise complaint, but the urgency in her voice was hard to ignore. They approached the door and knocked. Knock, knock, knock. Silence. Then slow, heavy footsteps. The door opened. Sibu Siso stood there, clothes neat, expression smooth, but his eyes betrayed him. "Evening, officers. We're following up on a third report," the taller officer said. "Multiple neighbors heard distress from inside your home." He stiffened. "I live alone. We need to verify." "No." The officers glanced at each other. "Sir, refusing a welfare check after multiple distress calls." "No." His voice sharpened, dominant, warning. "You do not have permission to enter my home." The younger officer stepped forward. "Mr. Dlamini, if someone is inside." "No one is inside," he growled. His mask cracked. Sweat collected on his brow. His voice shook. His jaw twitched. But without a warrant, the officers hesitated. "Fine," the tall officer said. "But if another report is made." "There won't be," Sibu Siso interrupted, slamming the door. Downstairs, Ayanda heard the voices. Police officers. They were right there, right above her. She pressed her hands against the door, tears streaming down her face. "I'm here. Please. I'm here." She screamed until her throat burned. But the basement was soundproofed too well. Her voice didn't reach them. She collapsed onto the floor, sobbing silently. Hope hurt, but it was the only thing keeping her alive. Over the next days, Neighbors grew uneasy. A group whispered outside the grocery store. A man told his wife he didn't trust Cebu Ciso anymore. Mothers warned their children not to walk too close to the house. The silence was no longer seen as peaceful. It was sinister. People didn't know what the secret was, but they knew a secret existed. And secrets in small neighborhoods always break eventually. It happened at 1:43 a.m. Ianda sat up, startled. A light, a real light, shone through the crack in the wall. Not bright enough to see fully, but enough to make dust shimmer in the air. It wasn't from inside the basement. It was from outside. Someone was standing close to the wall. Someone had a flashlight. Someone was investigating. Ianda gasped. She scrambled toward the crack. "Please," she whispered. "Please hear me." She pressed her entire body against the wall, as if she could push her voice through concrete. "Please help. I'm here. I'm here." But the flashlight moved away. Footsteps faded, and the person left. But they had been there. For the first time ever, they were close enough to hear her if she were louder. If she broke something. If she made noise at the right moment. Hope ignited again. Brighter this time. The turning point wasn't a scream. Wasn't a thud. Wasn't a police call. It was something small. So small the original police reports barely noted it. A smell. Not from the basement. From the yard. From the ground. A smell of rot. Decay. Something wrong. Something buried. And that was the moment the police truly began to investigate. The moment the story began to unravel. The moment Ianda's world began to crack open. But she didn't know it yet. Not yet. If you're still watching this, hit like and comment below where you're watching from. Also, do you think the police should have forced entry sooner? Or would you hesitate if you were them? And make sure to subscribe. Your support means a lot to us and helps us keep growing. January 19th, 2008. 2:06 p.m. Summer sun blazed across the quiet neighborhood. But beneath the heat was tension, the kind that made people walk faster, look harder, whisper louder. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. And people could feel it. It started again. Faint at first. Barely noticeable. Then stronger. An odor drifting from the edge of Cebu Ciso's property, near the garden bed, close to the basement foundation. Mrs. North smelled it first while trimming her roses. She gagged softly. "What on earth is that?" She stepped toward the fence. The smell grew stronger. Rot. Decay. Something dead. She backed away, shaking, and immediately called Thandika. Within minutes, Thandika arrived, and the moment she smelled it, her face changed. "This isn't normal," she whispered. "This isn't from food waste. Or animals. This smells like she cut herself off." But the word lingered in her mind. Death. When officers arrived this time, they weren't casual. They weren't relaxed. They weren't treating this as a noise complaint. They took photos. They measured the smell's origin. They questioned neighbors more seriously. And they knocked on Cebu Ciso's door with authority. This time, he took longer to answer. Much longer. When the door opened, the officers immediately noted sweat on his forehead, heavy breathing, soil on his shoes, a shovel leaning against the wall behind him. "Afternoon, Mr. Dlamini," the officer said. "We received a new complaint." Cebu Ciso's eyes darted nervously. "About what?" "A smell on your property." "There's no smell." "There is," the officer said. "And we need access to investigate." "No." The officer stepped closer. "Sir, we are escalating this. If you deny access again, we will request a warrant." That word, warrant, made Cebu Ciso's expression shift. Fear, panic, irritation, calculation. He forced a smile. "Let me tidy up. Then you can come." The officers exchanged a suspicious look. "No, sir," the taller officer said. "We need access now." His smile faded. "You have no right." "We do," the officer interrupted. "And we will enter if you refuse." For the first time in years, the power dynamic tilted, and Cebu Ciso felt it. Footsteps thundered above her. Loud, fast, aggressive. Voices. Multiple voices. She crawled toward the door, shaking. "Someone's here," she whispered. "Someone's here." She pressed her ear to the metal. "We need access. Open it now. Warrant." Her heart slammed against her ribs. This was real. Not imagined. Not a dream. Real people. Real officers. Right above her. "Please," she whispered. "Please don't leave." As officers circled around the backyard, the smell grew stronger. One officer crouched near the garden bed. Hey, over here. The soil was disturbed, freshly turned, uneven, not natural. The officer dug lightly with a gloved hand, then froze. Fabric, a piece of blue cloth, dirty, soaked, torn. He lifted it out, revealing something worse. Hair, human. He dropped the fragment immediately and yelled, "Call it in. Now." His partner froze. "You think it's human remains," the officer said. "If not now, then soon." Inside the house, Cebu Ciso heard the commotion, and panic crashed over him in violent waves. "They're going to take everything," he whispered to himself. "They're going to destroy everything." His hands shook. His breathing grew fast. He stared at the basement door. "She wasn't supposed to be heard," he whispered. "She wasn't supposed to be found." He paced frantically. "They'll take her away. They'll take everything." Then he reached for the keys. Ayanda scrambled away from the stairs the moment she heard the lock turn. She pressed herself against the far wall, shaking uncontrollably. The door opened. Cebu Ciso stood at the top, breathing hard. A mix of fear, rage, and desperation contorting his face. He descended the stairs slowly, eyes wild. "You've ruined everything," he whispered. "Everything." Her breath caught. "I didn't do anything," she whispered. "You screamed," he hissed. "You made them suspicious." He grabbed her arm sharply. "You listen to me," he growled. "If they come down here, if they try to take you, you say nothing. You hear me? Nothing." Ayanda shook her head, tears streaming. "I won't stay here." He grabbed her face harshly. "You will do whatever I say." She flinched. His grip tightened. "You will not ruin my life." But the moment he said it, everyone's fate changed forever. Because upstairs, officers were approaching. Fast. Mr. Dlamini. Bang, bang, bang. Open the basement door. Ayanda's breath froze. Cebu Ciso's eyes widened. No more hiding. No more delays. They had found the clue. They weren't leaving without answers now. He released her abruptly and dashed up the stairs. Ayanda crawled toward the crack in the wall, pressing her ear against it. Voices. Footsteps. Aggression. "No more games, sir," the officer shouted. "We have probable cause." Ayanda sobbed into her hands. "Please, please come inside. Please." Cebu Ciso opened the door, only halfway, blocking their view of the interior. "Basement is off limits," he insisted shakily. "Just storage." But as he spoke, he made a single mistake. He stepped back incorrectly. Just one step, just one wrong move. And behind him, behind his shoulder, behind the shadow, a faint, unmistakable sound slipped out. A sob. Ayanda sob. Barely audible. Barely a breath. But real. The younger officer froze. "Did you hear that?" The older officer stepped forward. "Mr. Dlamini, who is crying in your basement?" The question hung in the air like a blade. One officer stepped forward. Another put a hand on his holster. Thandika, standing outside her gate, held her breath. Inside the house, Cebu Ciso's face changed. Panic. Desperation. Calculation. He tried to swallow, but his throat tightened. "No one," he lied. His voice was thin, unconvincing. The officer's eyes narrowed. "Sir, we heard it clearly. Someone is downstairs." It was the TV. "Turn it on," the officer snapped. Cebu Ciso froze. He couldn't. There was no TV downstairs. There was only Ayanda. The officer saw his hesitation. And that was it. That was the moment suspicion became certainty. "Step aside, Mr. Dlamini." Cebu Ciso tightened his grip on the basement key. "No." His voice cracked. The officer stepped closer, towering over him. "Sir, we have probable cause. Step aside. No one is here." Cebu Ciso shouted. His voice shook violently. But the officers were trained. They could smell fear, hear irregular breathing, see the tremor in his hands. "Move," the officer repeated. "No," he whispered. Then he made a mistake. He tried to close the door. The officers pushed back instantly. "Sir, if you close that door, we are forcing entry." Their tone wasn't a threat. It was a promise. The younger officer radioed. "Possible hostage. Request immediate backup." Ayanda heard it, and she covered her mouth to keep from crying louder. Because this time, crying could save her. Her heart raced. Her breath shook. Her body trembled. But her mind, for the first time, was clear. "They're here! They're here!" she whispered. She looked around the basement. No weapons. No tools. Nothing useful. Except one thing. Her own voice. The one thing Sibusiso had stolen from her. She pressed her face against the crack in the wall. She inhaled deeply. Then she screamed. Not words. Not sentences. Just a raw, primal scream that carried every year, every scar, every broken piece of her life. Up the wall. Through the cracks. Into the air above. A scream the world couldn't ignore anymore. The scream slammed into their ears. The older officer jerked his head toward the basement door. The younger officer's eyes widened. "That is not a TV." And everything changed. The officers surged forward, pushing Sibusiso aside. He tried to block them, tried to hold the door, tried to slam it shut. But they were stronger, faster, furious. "Move! Sir, stop resisting. Step back." Thandika from outside cried out. "There's someone down there." Neighbors spilled into the street. People shouted. People pointed. People filmed on their phones. The facade had shattered. Sibusiso was no longer the quiet widower with a tragic past. He was the suspect, and the basement was no longer a rumor. It was real. Sibusiso lunged for the key. The officer grabbed his wrist. They slammed into the wall. A vase shattered. "Sir, stop." He fought with the desperation of a man who knew this was the end of everything. His career, his reputation, his control, his secrets. He screamed, "You have no idea what you're doing. She belongs." The officer punched him inside to break his resistance. "Get him down." They wrestled him to the floor. Handcuffs clicked. Sibusiso screamed through them. "You don't understand. You don't." But they weren't listening anymore. Their attention shifted to the basement door. "6, ma'am. We're coming." Ayanda heard the voices directly above her. She crawled toward the door, sobbing. Her fingers brushed the bottom step. "Please," she whispered. "I'm here, please." She heard footsteps. Heavy boots. Metal keys clinking. The younger officer knelt at the door. "Ma'am," he said gently, "if you can hear me, we're here to help you." Ayanda cried into her hands. The officer turned the key, and the lock clicked. 7. Freedom begins with a sound. The door creaked open. Cool air rushed down the stairs. Air Ayanda hadn't breathed in nearly a decade. It smelled like grass. Freshness. Light. Life. The officer stepped down slowly, flashlight in hand. Another behind him, gun drawn, scanning. "Ayanda," he whispered. She crawled into the beam of light, trembling violently. Her hair matted, her skin pale, her body thin and fragile. Eyes wide, terrified, not believing any of this was real. The officer froze. "Oh my God," he whispered. "Ma'am, how long have you been down here?" Ayanda collapsed forward, sobbing into his uniform. "Please don't leave me here." He lifted her gently. "You're safe now," he whispered. "You're safe." And the entire neighborhood, who had gathered outside, watched in shock as the truth finally walked up those basement stairs. A girl they hadn't seen in nearly 10 years. A girl they had forgotten. A girl they never knew was beneath their feet all this time. Ayanda, alive, barely, but alive. 30 minutes after the rescue. The police tape was up. Crowds of neighbors gathered outside the home. Media vans rushed in. Paramedics swarmed. The quiet street that had slept through 10 years of horror was now buzzing with the loudest chaos it had ever seen. Ayanda sat wrapped in a blanket, her body shaking uncontrollably. She stared at the sky, the real sky, as if she'd never seen it before. She hadn't seen it in 10 years. A paramedic knelt beside her. "What's your name?" "Ayanda," she whispered. He paused. He had heard that name before. That missing girl from years ago. The one everyone forgot. The one people assumed moved away. But she hadn't moved away. She had been here. The entire time. He swallowed hard and radioed. "Confirm. Possible long-term confinement victim. Female. Early 20s. Severe malnourishment. Psychological trauma likely." The words made several officers turn their heads. Because reality was sinking in. This wasn't just a rescue. This was a crime scene of devastating proportions. Thandika stood behind the crowd, tears streaming down her face. She had suspected. She had heard. She had tried. But she still felt guilty. Beside her, Mrs. Nur trembled. "I smelled something," she whispered. "I smelled something years ago, and I ignored it." Mr. Themba sat on his steps, shaking. "I heard her cry once," he whispered. "I told myself it was cats. I told myself it wasn't my business." The guilt swallowed the street whole. One neighbor said, 10 years. And she was right there. Another added, "We failed her." And they had. Every single one of them. Officers dragged him toward the police van, his face twisted in rage. "She's mine," he screamed. "You don't understand. You ruined everything." An officer shoved him inside. The door slammed. The screams were cut off. But the echoes lingered. Ayanda flinched when she heard them. Her entire body tensed. "Is he gone?" she whispered. A paramedic touched her shoulder gently. "He's gone," he said softly. "Forever." For the first time in years, she exhaled without fear choking her throat. Inside the house, investigators uncovered what the neighborhood never expected. Fake school slips, forged letters, invented addresses, fabricated phone numbers. A full system built to convince the world that Ayanda was away. One officer murmured, "He didn't just hide her. He erased her." And that was the truth. He had tried to erase her. But she was still here. Bruised, broken, but breathing. When the paramedics prepared to take her to the hospital, Ayanda grabbed one of their hands. Her voice barely audible. "My baby." The paramedic's breath caught. "What baby?" Her eyes filled with tears. "My babies." Her voice cracked. "Where are they?" Silence washed over the team. The lead officer stepped forward. "Ma'am, we don't know yet." Ayanda sobbed, her entire body folding in grief. And the community, the same community that missed every sign, fell into a suffocating silence. Because they realized, this wasn't just one victim. This was many. And answers would take time. As Ayanda was lifted into the ambulance, she turned her head toward the house, the place where she lost everything. Her childhood, her innocence, her freedom, her babies. The basement door was wide open, revealing darkness inside. But she was no longer part of that darkness. She whispered, "Goodbye." The paramedics closed the ambulance door, and for the first time in almost 10 years, she left the house. This time, through the front door, not the basement. Before we continue, hit like for Ayanda's strength. Comment below where you are watching from, and do subscribe so you do not miss out on the next story. January 19th, 2008, at St. George's Hospital, Port Elizabeth. Ayanda lay on a hospital bed under a thin white blanket, the fluorescent lights above softening into a pale glow. Nurses moved quietly around her, their footsteps gentle, their voices lowered. For the first time in nearly 10 years, she was in a real room, a room with windows, a room with people, a room without locks. But freedom did not feel like freedom yet. It felt terrifying, bright, overwhelming, unbelievable. She curled up slightly, trying to make herself small, a habit she'd carried from the basement. A nurse spoke softly. "You're safe here, Ayanda." She nodded, but her eyes were distant. She had heard safe before, from a man who stole 10 years of her life. Words meant nothing now, only actions, and she was watching everyone closely. Doctors examined her gently, explaining each step. "You're dehydrated. You're anemic. You're severely malnourished. You have multiple untreated fractures that healed incorrectly. You're experiencing signs of long-term trauma." Ayanda barely heard them. Her mind was stuck on one question. Where are my babies? A doctor exchanged a glance with a social worker. "We're looking," he said gently. "But we need time." Ayanda began to cry silently. Her tears soaked the pillow. Later that evening, 2 detectives entered the room. They were gentle, but their presence felt heavy. "Ms. Dlamini," the female officer began softly, "we need to ask a few questions about what happened in that house." Ayanda stared at the wall. Her voice was barely audible. "I don't want to say his name." "You don't have to," the officer replied. "Just tell us what you can." Ayanda trembled. She whispered. "He said, I was chosen. He said my mother abandoned me. He said I had no one. He said he needed me." She closed her eyes, and I believed him. Her voice cracked. For a long time, I believed him. The officers didn't interrupt. They let her talk. She continued. I had babies. I don't know where they are. I don't know if they're alive. Silence swallowed the room. The officers said softly, we will find them. All of them. That is a promise. Ayanda didn't respond. Her hope was too fragile to trust promises. But she nodded slightly. A tiny flicker. A tiny belief. A tiny step. By nightfall, the story hit national news. Woman found alive after 20 years in a basement. Neighborhood missed the signs. Father arrested. Possible multiple offenses. Where are the children? Reporters crowded outside the hospital. People online demanded answers. Talk shows debated the case. Social media exploded. How can no one notice? Why didn't the neighbors help her? Where are the babies? How long was she down there? Why did it take 20 years? Ayanda became the center of a national conversation she didn't ask for. A story she was forced into. A tragedy people couldn't look away from. Back at the street, neighbors stood in clusters, whispering through tears. Mrs. Nurse said, I smell things. I thought it was nothing. Mr. Themba murmured, I heard her once. I convinced myself it wasn't human. Mothers cried into their hands. Teenagers stared at the ground. Men shook their heads in shame. And Thandika, she sat alone on her doorstep, staring at the Dlamini house with tears streaming down her face. I knew, she whispered. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't push hard enough. But she was the reason everything finally broke open. And Ayanda would later learn her name and hold on to it like a lifeline. At the police station, Sibusiso sat handcuffed to a metal table, his breathing heavy, sweat dripping down his forehead. A detective leaned forward. Where are the children? Sibusiso stared blankly at the wall. They're safe, he muttered. Where? How many? Alive or dead? He gave no answers. Only one chilling sentence. She was meant to stay with me. She is mine. Detectives exchanged looks. They knew what that meant. Control. Possession. Obsession. They were no longer dealing with a grieving father. They were dealing with a predator. The hospital dimmed its lights. The halls emptied. The world outside buzzed with noise and debate. But inside her room, Ayanda lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She whispered, Please, let me sleep without dreaming of that place. But sleep didn't come. Her mind replayed everything. The screams. The darkness. The baby's cries. The footsteps. The lock clicking. The nights with no hope. The guilt. The fear. The loss. She clutched her blanket and whispered, I want to be free. But freedom hurts. And for the first time, she feared something terrifying. What if she didn't know how to live outside? Do you think freedom after trauma feels safe or overwhelming? February 2nd, 2008. 2 weeks after the rescue. Ayanda sat in a small therapy room, wearing clean clothes for the first time in years. Her hair had been washed. Her skin looked healthier. She had gained a little weight. But her eyes still carried the shadows of the basement. The therapist sat across from her. Tell me what you want most right now, she said gently. Ayanda stared at her trembling hands. My babies. The therapist nodded. We're searching. DNA checks take time. Ayanda swallowed hard. And my life, she whispered. How do I get it back? The therapist didn't lie. You won't get back the years, she said softly. But you can build new ones. Ayanda's eyes filled with tears. New years. New life. New freedom. But the old wounds remained. 3 days later, detectives returned. Ayanda, the lead detective said softly, we found records. Her heart stopped. Records? Of what? He continued. There were children. Multiple. We are still tracking them. Some were adopted illegally. Some we're not sure about yet. Ayanda covered her mouth. Her sob was silent, but powerful. Are they alive? She whispered. We believe some are. Her chest tightened. She pressed her head into her palms, crying with a mixture of joy, fear, and grief. Her babies existed. Somewhere. The world had taken so much from her. But maybe it didn't take everything. Prosecutors visited her next. We will need your testimony. Ayanda stared at the floor. He still controls me, she whispered. No, the prosecutor said softly. He doesn't. Not anymore. Ayanda didn't look convinced. Because freedom is not something you feel on the first day, or the second, or the 10th. Sometimes freedom takes years to sink in. News coverage exploded. TV hosts asked, how did an entire neighborhood miss 20 years of captivity? Who failed Ayanda? Should the neighbors be charged for negligence? Should the police have forced entry sooner? People outraged. People blamed. People defended. One reporter said, everyone failed her, except the one woman who didn't give up. They were talking about Thandika, and when Ayanda eventually learned her name, she whispered, thank you. You saved me, even when you didn't know me. A month later, Ayanda walked outside the hospital with a social worker. Her eyes squinted in the sunlight. The warmth on her skin felt unreal. People stared. Some cried. Some whispered. But Ayanda kept walking. One step, then another. She touched a tree. A real tree. Not concrete. She closed her eyes and whispered, I'm alive. Not a victim. Not a prisoner. Alive. And that mattered. On a quiet evening, sitting at her recovery home, Ayanda asked the question that would haunt the world. Why didn't anyone hear me sooner? It wasn't angry. It wasn't accusatory. It was heartbreaking. Because the truth was brutal. People did hear her. People did see the signs. People did notice things. They just convinced themselves they didn't. Out of politeness. Out of fear. Out of doubt. Out of wanting to believe the best in someone. But silence had cost Ayanda 10 years. And now you must face the same question. If you heard something strange from your neighbor's house, would you act? Or would you stay silent too? Would you convince yourself that it isn't your business? Ayanda's story ends not with perfect healing, not with all answers, not with all children found, but with possibility, with a woman who survived the darkest imaginable place, with a community forced to confront its failures, with a nation asking hard questions, with a truth that cannot be buried again. Ayanda looks into the camera at the documentary crew. Her voice is soft, trembling. I lost 20 years, but I didn't lose myself. Not completely. Not forever. She inhales deeply. And if you hear someone calling for help, don't look away. Don't assume. Don't wait. Please. She wipes a tear. You might be the only chance they have. Ayanda Dlamini spent 20 years, 7 months, and 14 days locked beneath the floorboards of the house in Port Elizabeth. We know this now, but she lived those years without knowing days existed at all. When investigators broke down the timeline, they concluded she entered the basement at age 14. She left at almost 32. Decades of life. Decades of childhood, adolescence, and early adulthood. Stolen. Not lost, because losing something implies you had control in the first place. Stolen. Through medical records, blood tests, and fragments of Sibusiso's hidden documents, the truth emerged. Ayanda had 14 babies during her captivity. 14. All born in the basement. All delivered without medical assistance. Without support. Without safety. Without dignity. Only Ayanda and the walls knew their first cries. And only Sibusiso knew what happened to them after. Ayanda now lives in a long-term rehabilitation center for trauma survivors. She has learned to sleep without checking the corners of the room. She has learned to walk without counting her steps. She has learned to breathe without fear of hearing a key turn behind her. She lights candles on the birthdays of her lost children. She writes letters to the one she hopes to find again. She journals her recovery, documenting small victories. I opened a window today. I walked to the store alone. I laughed today, and it didn't feel wrong. I touched grass without crying. Progress is slow. Some days she feels whole. Other days, she feels like she is still in that basement. But Ayanda survived 20 years in the dark. She survived 14 pregnancies under captivity. She survived the loss of 5 children and the uncertainty of 9 more. She is not fragile. She is extraordinary. Sibusiso Dlamini was convicted of kidnapping, false imprisonment, human trafficking, child endangerment, negligent homicide, sexual assault. He received 5 consecutive life sentences, with no possibility of parole. His final courtroom moment was chilling. When Ayanda entered the room, he did not look ashamed. Not guilty. Not remorseful. He whispered, "You were always mine." Ayanda looked him in the eye for the first time in 10 years and said, "No, I was always mine." The courtroom fell silent, and for the first time, she felt the invisible chains around her begin to crack. Before we close this story, I have a question for you watching. What would you have done if you heard those screams? Would you have acted sooner, or frozen like the neighbors? Tell me in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts. Because stories like this remind us that real monsters don't hide in forests. They hide inside ordinary homes, behind ordinary doors, on ordinary streets. And sometimes, the only thing standing between a victim and 20 years of silence is one neighbor brave enough to listen.